But now I want to talk about dialog processes, and in a minute we'll see how these things are related. Okay, so dialogs are different in that they require user input, form of prompts and responses. They do have a primary entity, but importantly, they can extend the data context that they run in by two different mechanisms. There's a query CRM data, and there's also lookups. Now, interestingly, dialogs, I think, do provide a glimpse of the the upcoming process-centric UI that is in the highly anticipated December service update. So by the January session, hopefully we'll have that service update out. If not, I guess it wouldn't be the December service update. And I'll give you a peek at that. We'll go through some of the interesting things that are new with that. But first, let's go through a quick contrasting of workflows and dialogs. A lot of little facts here. So what are in a second we'll contrast this with dialogs. Workflows are asynchronous. They run in the background. They might require UI to start. You can run them on demand, but they can also be event triggered. But they never require UI to complete. They don't have forms. There's no UI workflow. They can be triggered by events or started by a user. They run in the background. We saw an example. They can call child workflow processes, certainly. They can't query data, and they use the system job entity to store their history. So contrast that with dialogs. Different in all these ways. Dialogs are synchronous. They never start by an event. They always require the UI to start and to complete. You have to have forms in a dialogue, step-by-step kind of wizard process. They're always started by a user. They never are triggered by an event automatically. They always run through forms. Dialogs can call child workflows or dialogs. Workflows can only call workflows, which kind of makes sense, and we'll talk more about that. Dialogs can extend their data context by querying data, and they store their history differently. There's a dialog session record type that stores history. Okay, so what does the dialog, user experience look like? Well, here's what a dialog will look like. You've got these, it's a wizard kind of a thing, and you've got prompts and responses, and you can put tips up there and things like that. So here's the name of the dialogue will actually be in, it's not only a dialogue as in terms of a conversation, but it's also in a dialog box. We used to call those things. There's a page. There's that page construct. Within each page, you can have one or more prompt and response pairs. And I'm going to build one in a minute. That's the user experience there. Here's the designer experience. So the designer has some things in common with workflows, but it's different. So you've got this page construct, and you got prompts and responses. Now, responses, and this is directly from the book. So if you've gotten to page 195 in my book, this may look familiar. But just to shed a little bit more light on this, there are data types. 7 possible different data types that the response value can hold. Some things are relatively straightforward, single line of text, multiple lines of text, date and time, but some bear a little bit more discussion. In particular, the option set's interesting. One not good way, you can't reuse existing option sets. It would be nice if you could, right? If you think of it, when you prompt a user with a drop down or a pick list in a dialog, where does the data come from? It would be nice if you could get it from an option set in CRM. You can't, but you can provide the values yourself, or you can use a query variable to get it. So you can query CRM data and put the values in via a query. Now, you can update an existing option set, but you better select an integer data type. If you've ever run into this before, you'll back me up when I say it's a little bit frustrating if you choose a text value for a response type, and then what you really want to do is take that value that the user enters and use it to update an option set value on a CRM record. You can't, you have to delete it and start over. You can only do that with an integer because option set values in CRM are integers. So that's just kind of a fine point. So option sets can be used to present to users the results of a query. We'll see an example of that in a minute. Lookup, this is the other way. So besides query CRM data, you can also use a lookup field, and we're going to drill down on this in some detail in session 4, because this is a little tricky the first time you encounter this. But so session 4, January 11th, that's a Dialogapalooza, as I call it. We're going to go into some detail about dialogues in that session. Okay, but I'll show you an example now. It's a good example of what you can do with dialogues. But let me talk about a few of the real common scenarios first. And I'm highly interested in anything anybody is doing with dialogues. There's a lot of interesting applications of these. So if you're listening to this and want to shoot me a private email, kind of share your dialogue scenario, I'd be interested in hearing about it. So step-by-step record creation. Instead of, suppose you have an executive user or somebody who's kind of a casual user of CRM, and they've got a complex form. Well, some people have the deer in the headlights scenario, feeling when they stare that form in the face. You get, 137 fields on a form to fill out. Well, you can make it a lot simpler with a dialogue. If there's just really a few fields that you really want to capture and have somebody else come on afterwards and fill in the details, it's a good way to use a dialogue. You can use dialogues to copy records. It's another scenario. Goal records is one of my favorite examples, because goal records can be so time-consuming to create. You can have a dialogue that runs on a record and makes a copy of it. Some limitations there, but it can save you some time. The classic kind of scenario is a guided conversation. If you think about CRM, we have lots of potential guided conversations. If I'm having a conversation with a customer that's trying to upgrade from CRM 4.0 to CRM 2011, you can imagine all kinds of branches there. What version of CRM are you on now? Are you on-premise or online? Do you want to go to, when you upgrade, do you want to upgrade to on-premise or online? Do you have unsupported code? Do you have hundreds of unsupported, JavaScript functions and ASP.NET applications? That can make it a little complicated to upgrade, things like that. So that's the guided sales conversation, a couple of examples. A customer intake call. Suppose customer calls and talking to a receptionist, and the receptionist doesn't know from the start, is it a customer service incident? Is it a potential sales opportunity? You could imagine a conversation that would kind of tease that information out of the customer. What are we supposed to create from this? Data verification and customer survey, these two use cases are ones that I'll show you in the example. So those are pretty good ones. So data verification is, maybe it's part of the customer intake call. These aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. But if you're just you want to tell a contact, okay, here's what I have for your information. Is this your right email? Is your right phone number? Things like that. They're pretty good for things like that. There's lots of scenarios for them. Just a couple. So what is this demo going to show us? So in this demo here, and I'm going to go through in session 4, I'm going to go through dialogues in a much more kind of a systematic way, go through the different response types and things like that. I'll show you examples here, but I'll just do this in the context of one example. So in this scenario, this is the customer data verification. So you're going to use a prompt to display information. The prompt in this case, in this example here, this is a read-only prompt, and that's perfectly valid. A prompt can prompt you to type something in, but it doesn't have to. In this case, we're just saying, okay, here's what we've got. We run this for an account. Here's what we have for your, is this information correct? And notice here on the right-hand side, I've got a hyperlink that's going to allow them to go fix, maybe open the account form if they say, no, my company name doesn't have sample in it. You can go click that link there and fix the data, and then all that sort of thing. So that's the first one. Then it's also going to show us, so the next step is we can query, this is your query CRM data, and we're going to go for elemental goods, we're going to go query the CRM database and find just the contacts that are associated with elemental goods, and so we've effectively got a filtered pick list here. So, from the user standpoint, that's kind of what this seems like. So that's your query CRM data. So then I can select a contact. Oh, it's Susie Main that I'm talking to. Great, got your record here. And then we go through the same. So now we've got a second part of the dialogue that kind of flips the focus over to the contact. Okay, so Susie's, we've got to update her email and her phone number, so I'm going to click there to do it. Oh, and then, by the way, would you be willing to provide us feedback in the form of a short survey? Yes, no option. So the, customer service rep or the phone, person or whoever's talking to him says, oh, sure, yeah, yes. The customer says yes. You check yes. There's some conditional logic. And now in this case, what we're going to do is call a child dialog to run the survey. And notice this best practice, nice perky upbeat survey responses. So 5 is going to be super satisfied with an exclamation point on the end. That's not really a best practice. That's just my best practice. So we call it child dialog, but in this case, the child dialog, that would be a best practice. And you can probably guess why, because this is reusable. You might, especially if you spend a lot of time, as much time as it would take to put this survey together, you definitely will want to get some reuse out of this. So then we call it child dialog, and then we're going to go through and do something with the result. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so here is our dialog example that we'll run through here. And this shows a lot of interesting techniques. The dialogues themselves are kind of short, but I was able to get a bunch of interesting stuff in here, so this will be worth spending a couple minutes on. So this thing is going to start by the customer data verification process. And notice that that's a dialog process. It's written for the account record type. Let's deactivate these things. Well, let me show you how it works first, and then we'll come on dissect these. Okay. So let's go to accounts. And what I'm going to do is I'll navigate to accounts, and I always like to get some work done during a demo. So I'm going to pick on all these accounts that have sample in the name. This is the sample data set. And I'll run it on these and fix the data. You can see how this thing might work. So a dialog is going to be not triggered automatically. It's triggered by a user clicking Start Dialog for the most part. I could do this from the open account form too, for that matter. So I can be on the account form, okay, and click Run Dialog. Now for this scenario here, let's suppose I just start it from the grid. It'd be a little bit better from a demo standpoint. Either one works. So Start Dialog, Customer Data Verification. Okay, so Dynamic CRM knows what record this is. I've got access to all of the information on the account record because that's what we're running on. So the prompt shows us all this stuff, and so notice this guy says no, sample's not in the name. So I click here. Here's my hyperlink. Navigate directly to the account form. Going to fix the data. Let's get rid of that sample. Save that. And then let's save and close. Okay, so now I fixed it. It doesn't show it yet, but you'll see that in a minute. Now, we only have one contact here, but it illustrates the point here, and I'll show you how this works in a minute. If we had 10 contacts that were associated with Best of Things, they'd all show up here, but nobody else is going to show up here the way I've gotten this thing read. So there's Darren Parker. Presumably he's the guy we're talking to. So I click Next. Now it prompts, okay, here, now we're on Darren. Is this your right information? No, no sample. So we go click the link there. We're going to go now to the contact record. Let's get rid of that. And then we're going to do a save and close. Yep. Now we're going to ask him, he says, would you be willing to provide us feedback? Darren says yes. Now we're going to go, we just called the child process. We got that super satisfied. So here's my prompt. In this case, we do have a response, and we've got the tip over here telling whoever's conducting this. Oh, also let them know that they will be receiving an email with a link to a page where they can select a special thank you gift for providing this valuable feedback. So Darren, just wait. So now the dialog's done. We click Finish, and let's kind of see what happened here. Let's open this thing here. So here's the Best of Things record. Notice now there's no more sample in there because we fixed it. If I scroll down here, not only can I monitor a process, but I can see dialog sessions. So here's the dialog session that ran did one earlier and didn't finish it. That was that cancel. But here's the one that ran for Best of Things. So I can kind of see this. Now if I open this up, I can see all the responses that a user provided, and I can see kind of the step-by-step process. Kind of looks like the workflow monitor. And same thing here, by the way, as with workflows. I can file, print preview if I can get there. There, got to have some good coordination to do that. Get around that flyout. This is not a bad sort of a printed view of kind of the logic behind one of these processes. Okay, so we've got the fact that it ran. Then, if I go to, let's go to the contact record. Let's go to Darren Parker's contact record. Okay, now the dialog didn't run for Darren Parker. At least that initial one didn't. But if I go to dialog sessions for Darren Parker, notice that the customer survey that we ran, that we branched off to, and I'll show you that in a minute, that was for Darren Parker. That ran for the contact record. So if I open this thing up, okay, and I can actually see, what the overall satisfaction, those response was super satisfied, things like that. So there's various things you can look at. If there were comments, okay. Linked sessions, notice the originating session. So it's got this whole history, and you can have a whole chain of these things. Okay. Now, what's in details? Nothing interesting in details. I'm not doing much with the results here. In a production scenario, what you'd really want to do is take that response and put that into a custom. You would have a custom entity for survey responses. If you did that, then you could do things like graphics and averages and things like that. But I just focused on the dialogue piece of that. We'll look at some more fully fleshed out examples in the session in January. Okay, so how does this thing run? Let's go take a look at this. Relatively interesting dialogue process. So here's our customer survey and our data verification. Let's deactivate this so we can go see how they work. So here's where it kicks off, the customer data verification. Remember, this is written for account. So it's written for the account record types, dialog. You can hide this thing. We're not using input arguments or variables or anything fancy. We'll look at that next month. So here's the query. So this is the contacts at account query. So this thing starts with this first page. Here's my verify account information. That's the first prompt and response. And then we have the selected contact. I'll go through this quickly now. We'll develop this more fully when we have more time next month. But here's the query, contacts at account. How does this thing work? If I go into properties for this query, it's kind of odd when you see this the first time. It jumps into this fetch XML. That's because I had to, if I click on design, if I want to go design the query, here's what the query looks like. Parent. So notice it's the query for contacts. I've already created this thing, so that's saved. Parent customer equals, and I can put anything in here. This is just kind of a dummy variable. Suppose I have basic company in there. It doesn't matter, because what you're going to do with this when you build a dynamic query is you have to click on this modify query variables. This goes into the fetch XML, and then what you do is you delete this hardwired value in this variable 1. Then I'm going to put this account ID in there. That's what I was talking about before in a different context, but that's the ID. And I'll tab down here, and I want to add it, and click OK, and it's going to substitute it into this variable 1, and notice where variable 1 is. Variable 1 is what gets substituted at runtime into this filter condition. Okay, so that's how we query that filtered query that's only going to show us contacts for this account. So then here's how we set the first prompt and response. Here's my page for account data. This is the first page. Okay, and here's what this thing looks like. Now, I'm going to show you something that I'm sure you'll think I'm just a hopeless geek, but let me show you an example of something that will save you a lot of time. Okay, here's one of my pet peeves with the design. Suppose, what I want to build here is something like this. Account name, colon, address, city, state. It's virtually impossible to just position the cursor there, go over to here for dynamic values. Let's grab account name. Very deliberate. I put the cursor right there, got account name there, click add, OK, and you never know where it's going to go in here. Now, you can fix it, Control X, then position the cursor, get it on the clipboard, Control V. Then I go down here to say address, account, address, let's get address street 1, add, let's get rid of that account name, click OK. And here it put it in front of account name. Now I can grab it and then like that, but it's kind of a hassle. But let me show you a way that works 100% of the time. Suppose I do this, account name, colon, and I leave the cursor right there. Let's get account name there. Click add, click OK, and it goes right there. Then I stay on the same line, and I do address, address street 1. So far so good. Then I do state, base, same line. So the key thing is just to keep the cursor on the same line and not try to, format it as you're going here. So now I can choose address 1, state, province, get rid of street, just keep going, and I'll just do a website. We'll do one more. So if I do that, then it's an easy matter, because now if I press Shift Enter, I don't want too many spaces there. Just pop that down to the next line, then I position the cursor right in front of the thing I want to go on the next line. There's state, Shift Enter, website, Shift Enter. So that is the sort of tip that would have saved me a lot of time. Somebody told me that, a year ago before I had to kind of figure that out for myself. But anyway, so you can format that. It's just that it's not very convenient. So that's how we put the information in there. So we're just using dynamic values to put information in a prompt. This isn't a prompt that has a response. It's just got prompt. You don't have to have a response. What's this? This is how you put a hyperlink in there. This is a good trick too. This record URL that's been around for about a year. It came out in the service update in November of 2011. But what you do with that is you do something like this. So I'm going to type here in the tip, if necessary, comma, then I go to hyperlink. That's what this insert hyperlink thing does for us. Click here is the text to display. If I tab down to the URL, here's where I want the record URL dynamic. That's what this special field will do for you. So if I click OK, then the hyperlink command basically puts this tagging, it's kind of this meta language around that. It's not HTML, it's a special markup language that Microsoft used here. And then I'd say to open the account form. Right, so then that's going to display to the user as that. Notice this one doesn't have any, there's just, the response type is none. I should have included none on that table because that is a valid response type. So that's how you do hyperlinks. So then we go through this. The selected contact, here's your prompt and response. Here's where we're going to use the option set, but this is not going to be one of those where we define the values ourselves. This is, we're going to use the results of a query. So when I do this, there's a query variable called contacts@account. And the reason that that is available is because what? That's what I named this query. So that's why another thing about dialogues is that what you name things is more important, because you've got things like query variables to work with. You use things like that in dialogues more than you would in workflow. Then I go to another page. Now that we've got the selected contact, I can then add another page, and I'm going to verify the contact information here. So here I've got this laid out. So now the dialog knows about the selected contact. So we've used that query to extend the data context of the dialog process. So you can do things in dialogues that you cannot do in workflow. So same trick here. Then finally, come down here. Would you be willing to provide us feedback? We've got conditional logic here if, so now we're outside of that page, and you can collapse the pages to make it easier to read. So there's my page for account data. There's my page for contact data. Now I conditionally branch, and if they've said yes, then I'm going to link to a child dialog, and the child dialog that I'm going to link to is customer survey. Now, next month we're going to talk about input properties. So you can pass data from a parent dialog to a child dialog. So that makes them even more powerful. This one doesn't do that. But by the time you're running this customer survey, it knows what contact it is, right? Because that's passed automatically. That you have the data context. So this dialog knew it was running for George or whoever it was running for, the contact that I selected. So here's this survey. Now finally, create an email record, email with link to customer appreciation page. But this is interesting because this uses the email. So we're creating an email here, but notice the email editor in workflow and dialog processes has this insert hyperlink thing here. And you can put any link in here. This is an external link. So when we ran this for Yvonne McKay, so here's the link. Okay, here's a link to our customer appreciation page. And the only thing that this really shows is you can link to outside stuff too. So it doesn't just have to be, internal things within CRM. So you could construct those things dynamically and do some interesting things there. But that is enough for now. So let's jump back to the deck because it's just about time to wrap here. I encourage you to stick around if you have questions about anything we covered. So a couple of things. Session 4, January 11th. Drill down on dialogues. Go through those in a lot more detail. I've made the registration link. Send out an email when I get the recordings posted, and I'll send you a link to the slide deck if you're interested in that. And then I'll update the registration page so that it's basically going to be for session by session. So register separately for session 4, if you please, and that way I'll know that you were interested, and I'll send you the follow-ups and all that kind of stuff. So that's that. And thanks for coming. If you've got to drop off, no worries, thank you. But I'll stick around and answer questions to the extent that anybody has any.